Hi, how are you all doing? I hope you are all doing fine. So first, I would just like to thank you for really taking time to watch the first video that I have recorded, my recorded video for the subject SOCSCI ED 11. So for our lesson one, if you can remember, we were able to discuss about the overview of the Constitution, its purpose, and its function to a government. At the same time, we were able to talk about what is a state and what are the inherent powers of the state. So hopefully you were able to understand a lot of things from my discussion. And please take note that some of the things that I have discussed in lesson one would actually come out in your midterm examination. So for this video that I have recorded for today, this is for your lesson two. So I will be talking about the historical development of the Philippine Constitution. At the same time, I'll just give you a very short overview of the preamble of the Philippine Constitution. Again, hopefully you would still take time to listen to this video, to listen to my discussion, and hopefully you take down notes again, because again, the things that I'll be talking about in this video, some of them will also come out in your midterm examination. So to begin with, let's start. Let's start with our discussion. So allow me to take some time to. Yes, okay, this is good. So here. So if you can see in your screen, this is a timeline on the constitution that governed the Philippines all throughout our history. So the first constitution that we had was the 1899 Malolos Constitution. Then it is followed by the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, the 1973 Marshal of Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, and the 1987 Constitution, which is actually our current Constitution. So for you to better understand this historical development of our Constitution, let's uh, take a trip down the memory lane and talk about the history of the Philippines. So for the 1899 Malolos Constitution, if you will remember, the Philippines was actually under the Spanish regime for 300 years. And during those times, heroes started to rise. And one of the one of the most famous heroes that we recognize even until now is actually Andres Bonifacio. So Andres Bonifacio started the Katipunan. However, a political feud ensued between him and General Emilio Aguinaldo. So there was a faction between the members of the Katipunan. Um, General Emilio Aguinaldo started the Magdalo, while Andres Bonifacio started the Magdiwang. And over time, because of this constant power struggle that they had, and it was really an intense struggle between the two of them, Andres Bonifacio was sentenced to death by the military courts. While on the other hand, it was General Emilio Aguinaldo who rose to power. So basically, if you remember again in our Philippine history, actually, in our Philippine history, on June 12, 1898, the Philippine independence was actually declared by General Emilio Aguinaldo. And he became he became actually the first president of the Republic of the Philippines. And at that time, our government was actually governed by the Malolos Constitution. And the Malolos Constitution is actually considered as the first democratic constitution in Asia. So again, we became a Philippine Republic, and we were governed by the Malolos Constitution, which is the first democratic constitution in Asia. So you have to understand, let's define a republic and democratic first for you to be able to understand. Republic means we are a country of representation. So what we would usually do here in our country is that we elect leaders in a Republican country or in a Republic country. We elect leaders who will serve as our representatives in the government. So that's a republic type of government, Republican country. Meanwhile, when you say democratic, it means that it is a country for the people and by the people. And that is because Filipinos or we people in a democratic country have a participation in nation building and in the affairs of the government. And it is through our participation is through the representatives that we elected in the government. So again, republic means that we are a representative country. We are being represented. While at the same time, when you say democratic, it means that we are a country for and by the people because we have a participation in nation building and in the affairs of the government. So yeah, so for the features of the Malolos Constitution, first, it declared sovereignty among Filipino people. At the same time, it actually it gave basic civil rights to the Filipino people. Then it started the separation of the church and the state because you know that at the time when during the Spanish regime, the church has so much power. So when we created the Malolos Constitution, it was there in that constitution that we started to separate the church and the state. So meaning the church will not have any participation in how the state or our government will deal with the affairs of our country. So that's when it started in the Malolos Constitution. Then also in the Malolos Constitution, we introduced a presidential form of government in the Philippines. That's why we have General Emilio Aguinaldo as the first president of the Philippines. For the final feature of the Malolos Constitution, it has created a representative assembly, which actually served as the legislative body of the Philippine government at that time. So now we would we would come next to the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution. So if we continue the history, on December 10, 1898, just 6 months, imagine 6 months after General Emilio Aguinaldo declared the independence of the Philippines from Spain, the 6 months after, Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States. So what do you mean ceded? It means that the Philippines has actually been sold by the Spanish government to the government of the United States. So meaning all the rights that Spain had in the Philippines were all transferred to the United States. So basically a new rule started in the Philippines. And even if there were resistance at the time, the US military troops were just too strong and too powerful for the Filipino people. So that's why a new rule started in the Philippines, and it was the U.S. government that took charge in the Philippines. So it was on July 4, 1901 that a civilian government was started in the Philippines. So can you just imagine from 1901, it was only in 1934 that the Filipino people were allowed to create a constitution. So basically, under the Tidings-McDuffie law, the Filipino people were actually authorized by the US government to draft a constitution, provided that first, a constitutional convention shall be created to draft the constitution. Second, second is that the drafted constitution must be approved first by the President of the United States, and that drafted constitution, which is actually approved by the President of the United States, is to be ratified by the Filipino people. So basically, it was in 1934 that the Constitutional Convention that was called for to draft a new constitution drafted. They were able to draft in 1934. They were able to draft the constitution, and then it was only in 1935 that the constitution was submitted to the President of the United States for his approval. And it was on May 14, 1935, that the Commonwealth Constitution was actually ratified by the Filipino people. Again, when you say ratified, we have actually approved the Constitution through a plebiscite. So that's why for quite some time, the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution governed the Philippine government. And the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution actually was a testimony by the Filipino people to the US government that we are actually ready to become an independent country. So we needed that constitution to show that we are ready and we are not immature in our decisions, that we can become an independent country. And it was also the Commonwealth Constitution was also a way of reminding the US government of its promise to give independence or to give freedom to the Philippines. So eventually on July 4, 1946, on July 4, 1946, the US gave our freedom and we were finally recognized of our independence as a state. So basically, if you just really think about it, our real Philippine independence is not July 12, it's not June 12, 1898. Because even if at the time we were separated from, we became independent from the Spanish rule, we are still under being controlled by the US government. So it was only in 1946, July 4, 1946, that we were really declared as an independent country. So it was only during that time that we were free from any external control and that everything that we can do now are outside the approval of any country of any state. So that's actually our real independence on July 4, 1946. And it's all thanks to the Commonwealth Constitution because we were able to show again that we are ready, that we were really ready to become an independent nation. So let's proceed. Now we have come to the 1973 Marshal of Constitution. So if you will remember, in our history again, on September 21, 1972, then President Ferdinand Marcos actually declared martial law. So we were under the dictatorship of President Marcos. And the thing is, he wanted to change our government. So he drafted a constitution at the time. So that constitution was drafted by a constitutional convention that called for that purpose. The Constitutional Convention actually drafted the constitution, and it was unanimously approved by the Citizens Assembly eventually in 1973. And in that constitution, the Marshal of Constitution, it actually introduced a parliamentary type of government in the Philippines. So the constitution created a National Assembly, which would actually serve as a legislative body for our government at the time. And at the same time, a president is to be selected among the members of the National Assembly. And can you just imagine that that president can actually be re-elected for an unlimited number of terms, which is quite different from our 1987 Constitution, because in our 1987 Constitution, we would only allow a single term for our president, and the period for the term is only 6 years. But here in the Marshal Constitution, unlimited number of terms, meaning you can sit there as the president of the Philippines for unlimited number of years. So you would sit there for an unlimited number of years. So do you know what's the implication for that? There's actually definitely an abuse of power, because how come a single person can actually lead an entire country for an unlimited number of years? That's too greedy, actually. We must give chance to other leaders to really shine too. And so yeah, so that happened. That became a part of our history. But eventually, the the Filipino people at the time felt that there was really extreme corruption, and we needed change in the country at the time. So eventually, the EDSA People Power Revolution, happened, and the Marcoses were booted out of the Malacanang. And it was actually then President Corazon Aquino who rose to power and was seated as the president of the Philippines. So through the virtue of the proclamation number 3, she was able to create the 1986 Freedom Constitution, which is actually an interim constitution because it was only used pending the approval of the 1987 Constitution. So basically, in the 1986 Freedom Constitution, President Corazon Aquino was given the power to reorganize the Philippine government, and at the same time, she was given the powers to remove some government officials whom she thought were corrupt and who were connected to the Marcos family or to the Marcos government at the time. So basically, so now we have come to the 1987 Philippine Constitution, which is actually our current constitution. So through Proclamation number 9 by then President Corazon Aquino, she called for a 50-member constitutional commission. So there was no constitutional convention, which means we did not elect members for the constitutional convention, but rather through Proclamation number 9, she created a 50-member body which actually drafted the Constitution. So after the Philippine Constitution was drafted, it was introduced to the Filipino people through a plebiscite, and the ratification of the Philippine Constitution happened on February 2, 1987. And then eventually on February 11, 1987, the results of that plebiscite was actually announced to the public that we have accepted and we have approved the new constitution, the 1987 constitution. So there were actually debates as to when really the constitution took effect. Is it whether on February 2, 1987, when the plebiscite took place, or is it on February 11, 1987, which is the date for the proclamation of the approval of the 1987 Philippine Constitution? Well, of course, I have my own opinion about that, but I won't give you my answer given that I gave it to you as your assignment, and I think you'll also be having a debate as to when really is the 1987 Constitution really took effect. So it's actually very important to know as to when really a constitution took effect, because you have to understand that there were some rights that were vested to you in the 1987 Constitution that were not present in the 1973 Constitution or in the 1935 Constitution. And the thing is, laws, including a constitution, does not have a retroactive effect, meaning di siya atras. So everything must move forward, pagdulong forward. So basically, if you have some circumstances or any situation that happened before the 1987 Constitution took effect, then it means that you cannot claim for any rights at that time because there were no rights that has been vested to you yet. Because again, there's no retroactive effect in the Philippine Constitution. So that's why you need to really know as to when the 1987 Constitution took effect. Was it on February 2, 1987 or February 11, 1987? It's up to you, and I really do hope that you are able to present a very good debate on it. So I'm really expecting on your final outputs for that. So that is for the historical development of our Philippine Constitution. So you really need to know more about this Constitution. Again, our constitutions that governed here in the Philippines started in 1899 with the Malolos Constitution, making us a republic government at the same time, becoming the first democratic government in Asia. And then we have the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, which we actually used during the American rule. And then we have the 1973 Marshal of Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, which is actually just an interim constitution because it was just used while pending the approval of the 1987 Constitution, or our current constitution, the one that we are using right now. So following in our constitution, in the 1987 Constitution, we have introduced the preamble. So let me just read the preamble. So we, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of the Almighty God in order to build a just and human society and establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, peace, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. So just a very short discussion of the preamble. The preamble is actually not part of the Constitution. It does not give you any vested rights. You were not able to acquire any rights under the preamble. However, the thing is, even if it's not part of our Philippine Constitution, it's still very, very important because the preamble is actually the formal expression. It expresses gisulti niya, our ideals and the sentiments of the people who drafted the Constitution. So again, it's an expression, a formal expression that is actually embodied in the Philippine Constitution. It's a sort of introduction of the 1987 Constitution, and it expresses the ideals and the sentiments of those people who drafted the Philippine Constitution. And it served actually a lot of purpose. The first purpose of the Philippine Constitution is to remind everyone people who is the source of the powers granted in the Constitution, or who is the source of the Constitution. And as we read, in the preamble, it says, we the sovereign Filipino people. So we the sovereign Filipino people are actually the source of power of the 1987 Constitution. And it is explicitly expressed in the preamble that we the sovereign Filipino people are actually the source of power of the 1987 Constitution. And we have created the 1987 Constitution. And the second one is it sets forth the ends, or what do we want to achieve in this government. And as it is mentioned, we want to build a just and humane society. So again, that's one of the purposes why we have created a constitution. That's one of the ends that we want to meet in the Philippine Constitution, to build a just and humane society. That's why we have given a lot of civil and political rights. We have the Bill of Rights in our Philippine Constitution. And in fact, we have human rights, that we are given human rights. So, and that is because we want to build a just and humane society. And at the same time, we shall establish a government that shall embody our ideas and aspirations to promote common good. Again, What's the purpose of the government of the Philippines? So if you look back to the preamble of the 1987 Constitution, the purpose of the government of the Philippines is first to embody our ideas and aspirations. Second, to promote common good. Third, conserve and develop our patrimony, and then secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth. So meaning, at that line, for the blessings of independence, democracy, and under the rule of law and regime of truth, there's a practice of sovereignty. Again, we are given independence, we are given freedom. At the same time, the rule of law must establish. We must create laws in our country so that the Filipino people will be able to follow them, and there will be peace and order. There will be harmony in our country. So that's why we wanted a regime of truth. We wanted a regime of justice. We wanted a regime of freedom, of love, equality, and peace. So that's what we wanted, and these are all embodied in the preamble. That's the that's the ends. That's the purpose that we want to create in the Philippine Constitution, to build a government, to establish a government. And the thing is, again, as I mentioned earlier, the the preamble is not part of the Philippine Constitution, and we do not acquire any form of rights from it. However, we have to consider that under the preamble, it can actually aid in the legislation or in the interpretation of some important articles in the Constitution, because it is through the this preamble that we're able to aid to know if there are vague, or kung vague, when you say vague, dili tayo masabtan kay it's open to multiple. Vague, it's open to multiple interpretations. So for us to know what the drafters, those people who drafted the Constitution, what do they really want, then we always go back to the preamble. Let's base it. So muna siya ginabuhat in our courts, in our legislation. If you want to know what really is the purpose of this Constitution, or for us to better interpret if there are vague provisions in the Constitution, and we have to interpret them, then we go back to the preamble. We go back to the preamble because it is in the preamble that we would know what our the drafters, those who drafted the Constitution, really want to achieve. So that's again the purpose of the preamble. So again, it's not part of the Constitution, but it can aid in the legislation, most especially if there are vague or ambiguous provisions in the Constitution. And again, the preamble is an expression and just an introduction. In the introduction of the Philippine Constitution, we express our ideas and our sentiments. So again, it's the expression of the ideas and the sentiments of those who created the Constitution. And that is the purpose of the Constitution, why we want to create the Constitution. So that ends our discussion for lesson 2 of SOCSCI ED 11. So we were able to discuss about the historical development of the Constitution of the Philippines, and at the same time, we were able to talk about the preamble. So hopefully you were able to take down notes, because I'll be including them in your midterm examination, which I'll be announcing sometime next month. And at the same time, if you have questions or some issues or some concerns or some things that you really want to clarify in the subject, please do comment down so that I'll be able to address them. Let's be participative in this class. And hopefully, in my next discussion, you'll be able to send some more questions. Please comment down some questions so that I'll be able to entertain them. So, and we can address these questions that you have regarding the subject. So please wait for my next video, because we will be discussing again lesson 3 for our class. So again, thank you. Have a good day. Stay safe. And please do study well. Thank you.